It was a foggy Thursday night, the kind that made the streetlights glow like candles through a veil. The city was quieter than usual, a strange stillness hanging in the air. Jay, a 27-year-old food delivery driver who had been working the night shift for nearly 2 years, leaned back in his car seat, letting out a sigh as he waited for his next order. The radio buzzed with soft static. Nothing good was playing. The night had been uneventful, just a string of regular customers, all tucked away in well-lit neighborhoods. He didn't mind. The quiet nights paid better, and he preferred the lack of traffic. But around 11:45 p.m., something unusual came through on the delivery app, a ping that drew his attention immediately. The customer's name was listed only as Mr. Black. No first name, no initials, nothing else. Just that. Jay narrowed his eyes at the screen. That kind of anonymity wasn't common, but it wasn't against the rules either. What was strange, though, was the delivery location. The address was far out on the edge of town, near the older industrial area where buildings sat half abandoned and the roads were barely maintained. The kind of place people didn't usually live in anymore. More curious still, there was no apartment, number listed. Just a cryptic message in the delivery notes. Don't knock. Leave food outside the door. Wait exactly 2 minutes. Jay stared at that line for a while. It wasn't unheard of for people to request no contact. Lots of folks didn't like face-to-face interactions. But something about the phrasing felt off. It was too precise. Why 2 minutes? And why not knock? Still, the order paid well. Better than average. So, with a tired shrug, he accepted the request, picked up the food from a small 24-hour diner, and began the drive. The city lights began to fade behind him as he drove further out. The road turned rough, cracked and bumpy in places, with weeds poking up through the asphalt. The familiar became unfamiliar. Street signs were missing or twisted the wrong way, and as Jay reached the designated location, he slowed the car to a crawl. The address took him to a grim, narrow building tucked between 2 old warehouses. It looked forgotten. Windows boarded up, bricks crumbling, vines creeping up the walls like veins. The building was silent, like it hadn't heard a human voice in years. Jay parked his car under a flickering street lamp and stepped out, clutching, the paper bag filled with hot food. The air was thick with the scent of wet concrete and something faintly metallic, like rust. He walked up the short pathway, each step crunching broken glass and gravel beneath his shoes. The front door to the IIO building stood slightly ajar, creaking gently as if it breathed with the wind. Inside, the hallway was dimly lit by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, swinging just enough to cast moving shadows along the walls. Peeling wallpaper, graffiti, and water stains decorated the narrow corridor. There were several doors along the hallway, but only one at the very end stood out. It was painted entirely black. Jay didn't need to wonder if it was the right one. Somehow, he knew. The door had no number, no peephole, no mail slot. Just that deep, suffocating black, like it absorbed light instead of reflecting it. The air near it felt colder, heavier. Jay hesitated, standing just a few feet away, and then slowly bent down to place the bag on the floor. As he set it down, he noticed the floorboards beneath him felt soft, almost sponge-like. He shook off the thought, blaming it on a loose board or water damage. He stood, turned slightly to leave, but then remembered the instructions. Wait exactly 2 minutes. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and watched the timer. 1 second, then 5, then 10. The hallway was completely silent, but the feeling of being watched began to creep into his spine like cold fingers. It was the kind of silence that pressed on the ears, too quiet to be natural. He glanced at the black door, trying not to stare. Too long. At 45 seconds, he noticed the light above flicker, and for a brief instant, the shadows seemed to shift. Something behind that door moved, or at least he thought something did. A shadow that didn't match the shape of the door, a shape that didn't look entirely Human, he kept his eyes on the timer. 1 minute and 10 seconds. He could hear his own heartbeat now. His legs felt tense, ready to sprint. He looked down the hallway, wishing someone else was there, someone to confirm that this whole thing wasn't just in his head. At 1 minute and 30 seconds, the hallway grew colder, and the light above flickered again, this time staying dim. A low hum began to build in his ears, like the distant sound of machinery, or maybe whispers. Then, at the exact 2-minute mark, it happened. A voice, quiet and smooth, spoke from behind the door. Not from a speaker, not from down the hallway. It came from just behind that thick black wood, close enough that Jay could have reached out and touched it. "Thank you, Jay." His entire body went still. He hadn't said his name. It wasn't written anywhere on the bag or on the receipt. The app used only his ID code, and the restaurant wouldn't have known who the driver was. That voice, deep, slow, and chilling, knew his name. Jay didn't wait for anything else. He didn't check the timer again. He didn't look back. He turned and sprinted down the hallway, nearly slipping on the broken tiles near the entrance. He threw open the front door, dashed to his car, and slammed the door shut behind him. His breath was ragged, hands trembling as he turned the key in the ignition. The radio burst into static again, loud and sharp like a scream, and the black. Buildings stood behind him, silent and unmoving, like it had never spoken at all. The next day arrived with a haze that refused to lift, and Jay hadn't slept a minute. Every time his eyes shut, that voice echoed in the back of his mind. "Thank you, Jay." His room felt colder than usual despite the heater humming steadily. The sunlight filtering through the blinds brought no comfort. It had been one of those nights that clung to the skin, like something left behind didn't leave with the rising sun. Jay had tried to reason with himself, convince his tired brain that the man behind the door had maybe seen his name on the app, or overheard it somewhere. Anything normal, anything explainable. But deep down, he knew something was wrong. And the more he tried to forget it, the more the memory burned brighter, as if whatever waited behind that door didn't want to be forgotten. He considered deleting the app, quitting the job altogether, but it wasn't that simple. Rent was due in 3 days. He needed the money. So, against his better judgment, he went back on shift that evening, hoping to bury that one strange order beneath a pile of normal ones. The night started slow. Some fries here, a burger there, all delivered to chatty drunks and bored night owls. Normal, comforting. But then, near midnight, the same chill ran up Jay's arms as his phone buzzed. Again. The name Mr. Black blinked on the screen like a warning. The order came from the same diner, and the instructions were identical. Same address, same message, same 2-minute wait. Jay stared at it for a long time, not accepting, not declining, just frozen. He even considered reporting the order as suspicious, but there was nothing to report. Not really. Just a gut feeling and a voice in the dark. After another 10 minutes of just sitting in his car, heart thudding, Jay sighed and accepted it. Curiosity had sunk its claws into him, and something inside whispered that if he ignored this, it wouldn't just go away. The drive felt even longer, this time. Each turn down the dark roads felt heavier. Streetlights flickered more, and the buildings loomed like sleeping giants in the fog. When he pulled up to the same cracked parking spot, he noticed something new. The black door at the end of the hall was already slightly open, not much, just enough to show a sliver of darkness within, but enough to send every warning signal in Jay's brain screaming. Clutching the food tighter, he moved toward the building, though his legs felt sluggish, almost like something didn't want him to get too close. The hallway was even darker now. The single bulb overhead flickered weakly, barely holding on. Jay stepped quietly, passing the same stained walls, the same broken tiles. As he neared the black door, he noticed the food instructions were no longer just odd. They were impossible. Wait exactly 2 minutes. Then knock 3 times. Do not leave until the knock is returned. The message had changed. Jay's pulse spiked. He had screenshotted the last order, and the previous one had clearly said not to knock. Why had it changed now? Why was he supposed to knock this time? And worse, wait for a knock back? The bag trembled slightly in his grip. Something deep in his instincts screamed at him to drop it and leave, but another part, the same part that brought him back, pushed him to keep going. He reached the door. The sliver of space between it and the frame seemed to pulse, breathing almost. It was pitch black inside. Too dark. No light at all. He set the food down as instructed, stepped back, and checked his phone timer. 2 minutes. His finger hovered over the start button, but something in him didn't want to do it. He hit it. Anyway. The seconds began to tick. The air grew colder, each breath forming a fog in front of his face. The hallway behind him seemed to stretch, as if it was longer than it had been before. Time ticked on. 1 minute passed. Jay's fingers were numb, his eyes locked on the door. At 2 minutes, he raised his hand and knocked. 3 sharp, hesitant raps echoed into the blackness beyond the door. And then, silence. The kind that feels full, thick, pregnant with something unseen. The timer kept running. 20 seconds. 30. He waited, heart pounding in his throat. Then, suddenly from the other side, a knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Each one heavier than his. Louder. The kind of sound that came not from a human hand, but something bigger. Something not quite right. Jay's breath caught in his throat. He didn't move. Didn't blink. Then, without warning, the door creaked wider, just an inch more. A cold wind swept out from within, and for the briefest moment, he saw something inside. A pair of eyes. Not glowing, not bright. Just watching. Flat. Colorless. Too wide apart. They blinked once, slowly, and then vanished into the dark again. Jay stumbled back, nearly slipping. The bag of food was gone. Just gone. He hadn't looked away long enough for someone to take it. It had just disappeared. Swallowed. That same voice from the night before echoed again, softer this time. "Almost ready, Jay." That was all. Nothing else. He ran, faster than before. Out the door, into his car, tires screeching as he peeled off into the night. But this time, something followed. Not a person, not footsteps. Something colder. A feeling. It crawled into the backseat of his car and sat there, silent. He could feel it. Like an invisible passenger. Watching. He didn't look in the rearview mirror the entire drive home. The streets were empty, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. When he got home and locked every door, he finally dared. To glance behind him. Nothing. But the air in his apartment had changed. The lights flickered once. His phone buzzed. A notification. "Thank you for your delivery, Jay. Order 2 of 3 completed." 3? There had been no mention of 3 before, and the realization hit him like a wave of ice. There would be a third delivery, and whatever waited behind that black door was getting closer. The next few days were a blur of dread and uncertainty. Jay couldn't focus on anything. His mind kept drifting back to the black door, to the cold knock that sent shivers up his spine. The eyes that had briefly flickered in the darkness. The voice, too, that had called his name with such calm certainty. And then the chilling realization. Order 2 of 3 completed. His hands trembled whenever he picked up his phone. Every time the delivery app blinked with a new notification, he felt a lump rise in his throat, and his palms grew slick with sweat. The idea of going back to that building was suffocating. Every fiber in his body screamed for him to quit, to forget it all and leave it behind. But bills were due. Rent. Food. Life didn't pause for fear. Jay had no choice but to keep working. The tension gnawed at him, though, like a wound that wouldn't heal. He barely slept, his mind haunted by that voice that had known his name. On the third night, it happened again. A ping. The app buzzed, vibrating against the counter. Mr. Black, the name flashed, but this time the instructions were different, more unsettling than before. The same address, same 2-minute wait. But this time, the message added a cryptic line. Come alone. Jay froze as he read the words. The hair on his neck stood up. He wanted to ignore it, wanted to walk away, shut his phone off, and pretend nothing had changed. But a part of him, maybe the same part that had brought him back the last 2 times, felt compelled to follow through. He stared at the clock on the wall. It was already nearing midnight, the perfect time for whatever waited for him. This time, though, there was no hesitation when he started the car. The engine roared to life with a force that felt unnatural, almost urgent. The roads were eerily empty, darker than they had been the past few nights. His headlights cut through, the fog like a knife, illuminating only what was immediately in front of him. Each turn, each mile, felt heavier, as though the world itself was pressing down. When he pulled up to the building again, it was just as before, silent, broken, abandoned. But tonight, something was different. The black door was wide open. There was no sliver of darkness now, no hesitation, just emptiness that seemed to beckon him in. The wind whispered around him, cold and biting. Jay's hands gripped the food bag tighter, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. For a long moment, he just stood there, staring at the door. He thought he could hear something from within, but it wasn't a sound. It was more like a presence, thick and heavy, wrapping itself around his chest. The air grew colder. He swallowed hard. It was too late to turn back now. He stepped forward. The floor beneath his feet creaked louder than before, as though the building had awoken to his presence. Inside, the hallway was pitch black. Jay could feel the pressure of it, the weight of nothingness pressing against him. He could barely make out the flickering light overhead, hanging low like a dying star, casting long shadows that seemed to move with a mind of their own. He reached the black door. It loomed in front of him like some dark mouth waiting to swallow him whole. He glanced at his phone. The timer was already running. 2 minutes. He stepped back, placed the food on the floor, and waited. The seconds dragged on, each one longer than the last. His heart raced in his chest, the rhythmic thud louder than anything else. He stood in the silence, eyes darting to the door, to the shadows that stretched in the corners of the hallway. Nothing. No sound. No movement. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. 1 minute passed. The temperature seemed to drop, even more, the cold creeping into his bones. It wasn't just a chill. It was as though the very air had turned to ice. His breath was coming out in visible puffs now. 30 more seconds. The quiet was almost unbearable, pressing down on him. The timer reached the 2-minute mark. Jay lifted his hand and knocked 3 times, sharp, quick raps against the door. The silence that followed was so deep that it felt like the whole world held its breath. He waited, and then it came. 3 knocks, slower than his, deeper. They echoed through the hallway, reverberating in his skull. They didn't come from the other side of the door. No, they came from somewhere behind him. The sound was unmistakable. Heavy, deliberate. The kind of knock that couldn't have come from a human hand. Jay's spine straightened, his entire body tensing in response. Slowly, he turned. The shadows behind him seemed to shift. They moved in a way that no shadow should. It was as though they were alive, crawling toward him. The air around him grew thick, heavy, suffocating. He could taste it now, metallic and bitter, like something rotting. The shadows curled, expanding, gathering at the end of the hall. The black door loomed ahead, but he knew he couldn't move toward it anymore. Not without something following him. A low whisper broke the silence. "Jay." The voice was soft, but it was unmistakable. Familiar. Close. Too close. He didn't dare look over his shoulder. He felt the presence, though, like a pair of eyes on his back, watching him, knowing him. The feeling of cold fingers brushing against his neck made his stomach lurch. It was the same voice, the same cold, dead tone that had greeted him before. "Come closer, Jay." Panic surged through him. Without thinking, Jay bolted. His heart pounded in his ears as his feet pounded against the cracked floor. He didn't stop to look back. The hallway stretched out endlessly as he sprinted toward the door, but no matter how fast he ran, he could feel the cold closing in. The whispers, the shadows, they were behind him. He could hear them, footsteps that weren't his own, faint but unmistakable, keeping pace with his every move. His chest burned, but he couldn't stop. He reached the door, threw it open, and stumbled out into the cold night air. The world outside felt different, quieter. The shadows behind him faded as he ran to his car, throwing the door open and slamming. It shut. The engine roared to life, tires screeching as he peeled away from the building, never looking back. But as he glanced in the rearview mirror, his blood ran cold. There, standing at the edge of the building, was a figure. Tall, impossibly tall, cloaked in darkness. Watching him. Waiting. Jay's foot slammed on the gas pedal, and the car shot down the road. His mind was spinning, his breath ragged, but he couldn't shake the feeling. The figure was still there, watching. Jay couldn't remember how he made it home. The road blurred in front of him, the dim streetlights flashing like ghosts in the rearview mirror. His heart hammered in his chest, the image of the figure standing in the shadows behind the building, burning into his mind. He kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see someone following him, but there was nothing. No cars, no lights, just the endless stretch of empty streets. By the time he pulled into his driveway, the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink. Jay was exhausted, but sleep felt like a distant dream. His hands shook violently as he turned off the engine, his body stiff and aching from the tension. The events of the night played over and over in his mind. The door, the knocks, the voice, the figure. What was it? What had he gotten himself into? He hadn't realized how deep the paranoia had sunk into his mind until he stepped inside his house. Every room felt cold, even though the heater was running. The shadows seemed longer, more distorted than they should have been. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. The kitchen light flickered and Jay jumped. He swore under his breath, trying to calm himself. "It's just the wiring," he thought. "Everything's fine. It's just the wiring." But deep down, he knew it wasn't just the wiring. It was something else, something darker, something that had followed him home. He turned on the TV, desperate to fill the silence, but the flickering images on the screen did little to comfort him. Every sound, every creak of the floorboards made his stomach twist in fear. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, mocking him with its calm rhythm. Jay couldn't sit still. He paced around the living room, his mind racing. Every time his phone buzzed, his heart leaped in his chest. Was it another delivery? Was it a reminder? He couldn't stop himself from checking. What if it was another one of them? What if it was someone else trying to play their game? But each time he looked at his phone, it was just a message from a friend or a reminder about work. Nothing out of the ordinary. But that didn't ease the gnawing fear inside him. It wasn't just about the delivery anymore. It was about something far more sinister that had latched onto him, something he couldn't escape. Hours passed. The sun dipped lower, and a cold night settled in. Jay's phone remained silent for the time being, but the unease never left. He sat in the corner of his living room, eyes darting nervously to the windows, expecting something to appear in the darkness. Every car that passed seemed too loud, too close, like it was stopping just outside. He checked the locks on his doors again, even though he knew they were secure. He couldn't stop himself. The more he thought about the figure, the more real it became. There was something about its presence that wasn't human. Something in the way it stood, too tall, too still, like a shadow that didn't belong in the world of the living. The way it had just watched him as he drove away. That wasn't normal. That wasn't a person. And yet, Jay couldn't escape it. He couldn't let it go. Then, at exactly 9:02 p.m., the ping came. Jay's heart stopped in his chest as his phone vibrated on the counter. For a moment, he stared at it, unwilling to believe what he was seeing. His hand trembled as he reached for the phone, tapping the screen to unlock it. There it was, the familiar message. Order 3 of 3. Same address. Come alone. Jay felt the floor shift beneath him. The cold dread returned, crawling up his spine, sinking its claws deep into his flesh. He couldn't go back there. Not after everything that had happened. He couldn't face whatever waited in that building. The voice. The figure. But as much as he tried to convince himself to ignore the message, something inside him, some dark, twisted part, wanted to go. Jay had no idea what it was, but he could feel the pull. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was something darker, like an addiction. Whatever it was stronger than his fear. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like a suffocating blanket, but before he could make a choice, another ping came through. This time, it wasn't just a message. It was a phone call. Jay hesitated for a moment, staring at the screen, the number showing as unknown. His fingers hovered over the phone. Should he answer? Should he just ignore it? The phone rang again. This time, he picked up. Hello? His voice was shaky, almost unrecognizable. There was a long pause on the other end. Then, the voice spoke. Slow, deliberate, cold. Jay, it's time. It was the same voice, the one from the building, from the shadows. The words sent a shockwave of panic through him, his blood running cold. Who is this? He managed to stammer. There was a low chuckle on the other end. It wasn't a friendly laugh. It wasn't even a human laugh. It was a sound that made his skin crawl. You know who I am, the voice said, and you know what comes next. The line went dead before Jay could say anything else. He stared at his phone, his hands shaking uncontrollably. His mind raced with questions. What did they want from him? Why him? What would happen if he didn't show up? Would it be over? Or would they come for him anyway? But deep down, a darker thought crept into his mind. Maybe he had no choice. Maybe the pull wasn't just curiosity. Maybe it was fate. Or something worse. Jay grabbed his keys and his jacket, his body moving before he could fully process what he was doing. The drive to the building felt different. This time, the air was heavier, thicker. Every turn seemed to stretch out longer than the last. The clock on the dash blinked ominously. 11:58 p.m. When he pulled up to the building again, his heart sank. The door was wide open. It was no longer just an invitation. It was a command. The shadows inside seemed darker than before. They seemed to beckon him in. But this time, Jay didn't hesitate. He stepped out of the car, the cold biting into his skin. The weight of something ancient seemed to press down on him as he walked toward the building. He couldn't explain why he went inside. It wasn't because he wanted to. It wasn't even because he had to. There was something pulling him, dragging him forward, and no matter how much he tried to resist, he couldn't break free. The moment he crossed the threshold, everything went silent. The air was still, and then the door slammed shut behind him.